Have any of you read The Life of Milarepa? Well, you remember he described this, what I've been talking about. And he said, in the beginning of your meditation, your mind is like a mountain stream. It's tumbling and splashing and rushing around over rocks, getting lost in tunnels, coming out and splashing again, full of action. That's how your mind is in the beginning. When you've trained for a little bit, the mind becomes more like the upper reaches of a river. It's flowing quite well now, but it's still having some rapids and splashing around a bit. But it's much more peaceful than it was at the beginning stages. And that is when you can start sitting beside the river, more or less peacefully. Not entirely yet, but more or less. Then, as your training goes on, the mind becomes like a river that is further and further away until it's right in the distance and it's completely smooth. It just goes smoothly into the ocean. And that is the mind of the accomplished meditator. You rest, your mind rests, comes to rest, and you remain there. The flow is the flow of potential to think, potential to experience the emergence and engaging of thought. But because you are settled and because you are grounded, that's happening in a place in the mind that's very easy to see, and it doesn't have that huge magnetic attraction of wanting to engage. And then you're able to come to rest, and the mind will then rest, and it will be like the smoothly flowing river with thoughts somewhere within the depths, but somehow they don't quite come to the surface, somehow they don't quite interfere with your experience. So those are the stages we go through. If you don't achieve the third in the first half hour, don't worry. It probably will take you 10 or 20 years, but this is a long-term training, isn't it? And a lot of people have the attitude that this is a training that is going to go on through lifetime after lifetime. It's not just this lifetime. So don't worry. Once you set in mind, once you set going those tendencies and those intentions particularly, then a very powerful process begins. Okay? So, we've looked at mindfulness, which we can define. Mindfulness is knowing what is happening while it's happening without preference. Yeah. So, that is easy to understand. What it means is we bring our attention into the moment knowingly. Now, this may sound easy and rather, trite, but it's not. It's because our minds have this natural tendency to go towards engaging and distraction. So all we're doing in the beginning stages of our mindfulness is bringing the mind back out of distraction. Mindfulness. So we recognize we're doing this while it's happening. I recognize thoughts appear, tendency to engage, I bring the mind back to the support. Thoughts appear, tendency to engage, back to the support. Thoughts appear, oh, this is a really good one, I must think this, it's important. So away you go. 10, 20 minutes later, back to the support, settle. So As a beginner, if you are a beginner, a lot of your time will be spent enjoying distraction. You've no idea how much you enjoy it when you're supposed to be doing something else. So when you've decided to be mindful, you focus there for a short while, and then it's like you've been sent to school. And you're in the classroom and you're looking out the window and you think, it's much more fun out there. I think I'll just go out for a little while. And that's it. You're done. So that's great. It's okay like that. But slowly your training will continue until you really understand what is the settled mind. You can recognize it. Then we start looking at insight. Definition of insight, very similar to mindfulness. Insight is knowing what is happening. Oh, thank you. Recognizing, see, Heather recognized. Recognizing what is happening while it's happening without preference. Recognizing what's happening while it's happening without preference. Now, this without preference may sound quite easy, but are you aware of the degree to which your mind is driven by preference? All the time. We are constantly experiencing the pull of preference. I walk into this room, and the first thing I think of is, where would I prefer to sit? And then there are all these wonderful people. Which one would I prefer to talk to first? And what would I decide to say? And so it goes on. All these preferences. So insight is recognizing this activity of preference. And I've got my little yellow book here. Some of you know it. Insight is dependent on recognition, and we've got 10 recognitions. Shall we go through the list? The list of 10. Number 1 is the undercurrent or the current. Now, you will notice that in the background of your mind is a constant flow of thoughts, chatter, images, sensations. Can you relate to this? It's what makes it difficult to meditate, because you sit down to be quiet and straight away chatter, chatter, chatter. All the chatter. Always inviting you to join in. It's like a party with a lot of old people sitting chattering around, and you're walking by and they say, hey, come and join us. So this chatter is going on. That is the current or the undercurrent. And it carries all the stuff of this life. It is the bed within which all the stuff of this life is rooted, and it's chattering through your mind. You don't need to cause it to happen. It just happens by itself, completely freely. So the current or the undercurrent is there all the time. I'm using both these words because Trungpa Rinpoche called it the undercurrent, but I call it the current because it isn't always underneath. It's often on top. So you choose which one you want to use. So that's all the chatter. The second is the observer or the witness. So some part of your consciousness is capable of witnessing its own experience. Now this may be a unique feature of human consciousness, but we are capable of witnessing our own experience and talking about it. We do. We talk about it endlessly. The first thing you ask a person when you meet them is, how are you? And what you really mean is, how's your undercurrent? Although you don't express it in that way. And then, if you're unlucky, the person is terribly honest and they will give you a half-hour rundown of all their problems, which wasn't what you meant at all, but it's what you got, and it's the way we function. So we are very preoccupied with the content of the undercurrent. It's crucially important. And the best way you can offend a person is to cast aspersions on their undercurrent. You know, the way you did that, or you said that yesterday, was really quite stupid, wasn't it? Whoa, that's the undercurrent you've talked about now. And not nice, not wise, not advisable. So there is this undercurrent and the witness. And the witness is tremendously concerned with the content of the undercurrent and everything to do with it. So that's the beginning of the 10 steps of recognizing how we are as human beings. This is recognition of our human condition. Undercurrent or current, and observer or witness. Next is awareness. Now, awareness is, as I've said, it's comprehensive, it's global. So awareness is always there. It doesn't switch off. It's not dependent upon where you focus. For example, if I'm focusing on talking to you, or you're focusing on listening, do you notice how you are simultaneously aware of what else is going on in the room? You didn't try to be, because you're actually focusing very kindly on my words, and what else is happening in the room isn't your primary concern, but nevertheless your awareness reveals it. So this is how we are in the world. We've got awareness, it's revealing all the time, and within that we are focusing. So there is awareness, and then what we focus on is what are called appearances. Appearances. Everything that appears, everything that happens is an appearance, and awareness reveals it. Awareness reveals all the appearances. Number 4 is the relationship between the observer and the undercurrent. Now, this is the important one for most of you, because this relationship will determine whether or not you're happy, or unhappy, or neurotic, or psychotic. All your mental disturbances and your emotional disturbances are dependent upon or caused by the relationship between the observer and the undercurrent. The most easy one to detect is when you're experiencing a negative emotion and you don't want to. So that is the relationship between the observer and the undercurrent. The undercurrent is doing something which the observer doesn't want to experience. And it can be so bad that you end up saying, I don't want this life. This life is constantly producing unpleasant experiences, and I don't want it. And we know what follows from that, tragically. So when you look at this extreme, you can see how important mind training is. Because the mind that is trained will not get caught in that cycle of warfare between the observer and the undercurrent. A huge amount of what we are doing in our mind training is creating a peaceful relationship between observer and undercurrent. When you meditate, you settle the mind and you come to ground peacefully. It happens by itself. So you feel at peace and relaxed and easy. So you've sorted out the relationship between the observer and the undercurrent. Then, number 5, you begin to see where activity happens, why activity happens in the mind. Now, a lot of it is due to the mind's tendency to be distracted. So I sat down to be peaceful, and the mind immediately engages something. It hears a nice sound and goes off. So I bring it back, and then it goes off somewhere else, and I bring it back. But then eventually you slowly start to settle, and you begin to witness some of the more unseen activities of the mind. Now, what this is telling you is that you're only in touch with a limited amount of what the mind is doing. So a large amount of what your mind is doing escapes awareness. It happens outside the range of your awareness. And it varies with different people. Some people are very out of touch, and they are the people who blunder around in life. They're always making mistakes. They're upsetting others. And they're the sort of person who will look at you wide-eyed and say, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what happened. I was having a peaceful time with somebody and suddenly he got angry. And so it goes on. So it's about the impulses. They will arise and we will engage them. What sort of impulse most often arises in your mind? To act immediately on a thought, excellent. Another one would be get up and go and make tea. That's an impulse. Another one would be this guy's boring. Going to get up and go. Impulse. So many, many impulses are arising in our minds all the time. A lot of the time we're acting on them. And a lot of the time, we should not have acted on them if we wanted to have a peaceful life. Acting on impulse often, not always, but often, leads to problems. Don't you all know that? An impulsive decision. You went to a sale, and your impulses were going mad. Next, number 6, recognizing the cycle of thought. And this is very, very important because it reveals to us how we create reality. Reality in inverted commas. We are constantly creating our own version of reality. We're creating our own version of reality. And it starts with a thought. Thought springs in your mind. Now, you've probably all noticed this, how thoughts appear in your mind. Sometimes you can see what triggered them, other times not. So thought appears in your mind. Then the mind witnesses that, and the tendency to engage is triggered. So thought appears, mind engages. It engages the thought. And what happens after that? Once you engage the thought.
You might believe it.
You might believe it, sure. And thinking starts. So the thought appears, we engage, and we think. Then the last one is solidification. Solidification. The content of the thought becomes real to the mind. Becomes real. Now, in abstract, I'm losing one of my mics here. In abstract, this might sound a little bit difficult. But let's look at an example. your usual happy self, your life is trundling along happily, and then somebody says to you, oh, by the way, do you know so-and-so? And you say, yes, I know so-and-so, I've known him for a long time. Oh, well, he was saying really bad things about you the other day. Really? Yeah, he was trashing you big time. Now what's happening? A thought has moved on to the point of solidification and reality, isn't it? The reality now is that so-and-so trashes me and has been trashing me and obviously doesn't like me and is obviously my enemy, and that is all real. Have you ever been through a cycle like that? It doesn't have to be so drastic. So that is your reality. Now, try and put your mind in that place and see how solid and real that situation is. Then, of course, you meet this guy and you confront him. And he says, I've never said anything about you to anybody. He said, you're so unimportant in my life, why would I want to talk about you? And suddenly the whole thing has gone up in a puff. Nothing. But until then, it was a huge, solid, real issue. So that is what we're doing all day long. We are creating our own reality. And then we are putting ourselves into it, and that is how we are living our lives. We're living our lives through that reality. If I'm a miserable person, for example, I get up in the morning and I look out of the window and it's cloudy. Oh, another cloudy day. And I go miserably through life. But if I'm like Heather, I'm very cheerful and joyful. I get up in the morning and I think, oh yes, I've got lots of lovely things to do. And so it goes on. Our lives are dependent upon the extent to which we trash ourselves and engage negativity. Good. Then there is resting. Settling, grounding, resting. Resting is the way you come to rest when you're doing your meditation. You're not engaging thoughts, you're not engaging experience, you're just resting. Then how we relate to feelings. How we relate to our own feelings. Mostly, we are very narrow-minded. We only want to experience nice feelings. Don't we? Nice feelings. We don't want the negative ones. We don't want the awkward, difficult ones. So we are, again, always trying to move through life and just engage what we like. Then last of all is resting, and that we've talked about quite a lot. So you've come to rest. Now you're getting restless, aren't you, Chin? Well, I have to blame somebody.